Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Ichon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications. Tim, how was your 4th of July?
It was great. I went with our Lance Zumi, and we marched in the East Sacramento 4th of July parade, which is really kind of out of central casting as a nice community, organic 4th of July parade. And all the neighbors, have parties on their lawns, and all the little kids dress up, and everybody just has a great time. You march around the neighborhood. So that was a lot of fun. And then I went to a friend's house for a party afterward. And in Sacramento County, it's legal to blow up certain kinds of fireworks. So we did that at the end of the day. And, watching little kids, they love nothing more than getting the sparklers and watching the fireworks go off. But, it was interesting. We talk about inflation, and we're going to talk about that a little bit with our guest today. I was talking with one of the fellows who got all the fireworks for this party that I went to. And fireworks are expensive. If you've never gone and bought fireworks before, they are expensive. And it's not like buying a Christmas tree for half price on Christmas Eve. They are expensive right up to the moment. He said the package that he got, which was one of these big kind of multi firework packages, was say $150 a few years ago. The package he got this time, which was an equivalent amount of what he had gotten before, was over $300.
Wow.
And I said, wow, that's right there. They always put out these things. What is your 4th of July dinner cost this year versus last year? Well, someone should keep track of that, because that was stunning to me how much they had gone up. But when you watch them, they're worth every penny.
Tim, Lance Zumi, who runs our education department, sent over these fabulous pictures of the three of you, including Emily Hump, who is our Deputy Communications Director, and yourself. So tell me about how the guys came to those costumes you wore.
Well, for me, I like to get the goofiest American shirt that you can get. So I saw last year somebody had a shirt that said, America, undefeated, back-to-back World War champ. And I thought, I've got to get one of those for next year. So I did. It was under $10. Probably the only time I'll ever wear it, but I got lots of compliments on that shirt. And then Lance, for those of you who may not know this about our Lance loves a costume for everything. In fact, I don't know, his condo is not very big. I don't know where he keeps all of these things. So every year you're left wondering, what is he going to do to top himself for the 4th of July? So this year he went with kind of an oldie but goodie, is that he has a kind of Revolutionary War soldier outfit, but he jazzed it up this year with his red tri-corner hat, which he told me the Revolutionary War soldier wouldn't normally wear a red tri-cornered hat. They would normally wear a black tri-corner hat. However, everybody these days, young people especially, the look is very similar to, if you've ever watched the movie The Pirates of the Caribbean. So people think he's a pirate when he wears the black hat. And in fact, a few people came up to him during the parade and said, "Arg." So he wore the red hat, so you'd know he was a Revolutionary War soldier.
And it looks like Emily was all decked out in red, white, and blue.
Yes. And her blue glasses too. So
I went away for the weekend. I went to Northern California, went to Sonoma to taste some wine. And one thing, back to the inflation, potential recession theme, some of the wineries that I had gone to a tasting for said that wine tasting visits were down considerably. And so that makes me wonder, if you're going to choose between gas and food on the table, not likely to go wine tasting in Sonoma. So that's very worrisome.
Well, yeah, from Sacramento, it would cost me, a tank of gas to go to Napa or Sonoma round trip. That's $65, $70 now. Then plus you get there and have to pay, the high prices for wine tasting there. So I get it.
So our guest this week is Wayne Winegarden, who is a favorite of ours, always a great guest. We chat with Wayne about inflation and gas prices and California's economy and how it's doing. So I think our listeners will get a lot out of it. He's our resident economist, and it's kind of a freewheeling discussion on on the economy.
And what's great too about it is you've heard all of these as the debate over the gas tax and gas tax rebates and all of these issues have been in the news in recent weeks. You hear a lot of yin and yang, a lot of claims being made back and forth. So we really break down some of these issues. Like in California, there's the debate over this quote unquote mystery surcharge on gasoline that some people are trying to push as their theory for why gas prices are high. And Wayne goes through that theory and spoiler alert, he debunks it. But you really get to the heart of the matter listening to what he has to say about why gas prices are so high. And after listening to him, I can't help but think why they're going to be high for a long time to come.
That's right. So thank you so much for listening. And here's Wayne Winegarden. Welcome back to Next Round, Wayne.
Oh, thanks so much. So great to be here.
So record gas prices are at the center of the political debate in Washington and Sacramento. So let's start our discussion at the beginning. How did we get here? When President Trump left office, America was pretty close to being, quote, energy independent. But now we're paying $7 per gallon for gas in parts of California, and there is no relief in sight. So what are some of the policy mistakes and other factors that have triggered today's high gas prices?
The high gas prices today there's some unique factors impacting, the gas markets, but there's also, it's just part of the broader inflationary trends. If you go back to around the end of 2020, around November 2020, nationally gas prices were around $2 a gallon, which is about where they'd been for, 4 years or so. And then you saw this just steep climb in gas prices. And now we're talking about almost $5 a gallon nationally. In California, we're so much worse at $7.40, as you mentioned. And if you look at the, inflation, you take the consumer price index, it's the exact same pattern. So starting at the end of 2020, we started seeing this steep rise in the overall price level. And so what that means is that part of the reason we have such high gas prices is because the Federal Reserve and the federal government combined made such a huge mistake in overstimulating the economy and in monetizing just huge increases in the debt that it's caused inflation. Inflation is broad-based increases in prices in the economy. And so our gas prices that we're seeing is part of that. And so that is a big part of what's happening. But another part, which is unique to gas, is that for the past 2 years, we've been consistently restricting the production of oil, the production of natural gas, and we're disincenting investments. You can see, the cancellation of Keystone Pipeline, all of this infrastructure, refining capacity. And so we actually are self-imposing a supply side constraint in the production of oil and gasoline. And that in itself is driving up oil prices as well. I mean, just take the EPA right now. They're trying to make it more difficult to drill in the Permian Basin, that's in around Texas and New Mexico, using ozone standards. They're trying to stop that fracking from occurring. This is one of the most productive fields we have in the country, and we're looking at more regulations that are going to make it more difficult to develop. That is like the second plank that's driving up gas prices.
So in both Sacramento and Washington, it seems like Democrats are trying to play a game of political hot potato. They're trying to change the subject from these policy mistakes that have brought us to where we are today. And on both coasts, they're calling for investigations into so-called price gouging by oil companies as the culprit of rising prices. So are they right? Are oil companies really taking advantage of the situation by hiking prices? Government has made policy mistakes. Has big oil also made some mistakes in your view?
Whenever something unpopular is happening, politicians will always roll out the usual suspects and round them up, and it makes a great distraction from voters from the actual causes. That's just it's in politicians' DNA, and so the idea of price gouging by oil companies, it really is that type of kind of round up the usual suspects. Has oil companies made mistakes? Well, absolutely. Everyone, mistakes happen. But what's driving, as we just talked about, what's driving the high gas prices is the policy mistakes by the central bank, the policy mistakes by the federal government. I mean, that's why prices are where they are. And I think when you look at those accusations, the fatal flaw is if oil companies, if they had the ability to price gouge, why'd they wait until 2022? Right? If you think that here's these greedy business people who have the ability to manipulate prices, and they're hearing the environmentalists saying, "Oh, we're going to transition to clean energy, we're going to move away from oil." So if you have long-term sales prospects, that's gloomy, and you have the ability to ramp up prices to price gouge, wouldn't you have done that a long time ago? Right? There's that logical flaw. If it is price gouging, why would they wait so long? And that just gets because the bottom line is what's happening is from restrictions on supply, from regulations, broader kind of monetary policy mistakes, that is just driving up inflation and driving up, as a big part of that inflationary problem, driving up gas prices. It's a complicated issue. You need to sit down, kind of go through all of the different economics, which is difficult to do and takes a long time. A much better political talking point is finding someone to blame and blaming them. But there is no merit in that, and it doesn't help us resolve the problem either.
So now in Sacramento, there are calls for investigations into the activities centering around this so-called mystery surcharge for gas that one UC Berkeley economist has theorized about. So what's your view? Is there anything to this mystery, or is this just another distraction from the policy mistakes of government officials?
There's really no mystery. There's actually two separate parts of the issue. One, the structure of California's gas tax, right? So you have to remember our gasoline tax, we have a fixed fee, which is how most gas taxes are imposed, X cents per gallon. But we also have a sales tax that's applied to gasoline that's 2.25%. And then there's a few other fees, underground storage, tank fee, things of that nature. But it's part of what we're talking about in terms of the mystery is that 2.25% tax, right? When the price of oil goes up and you have a tax that's a percentage of the gasoline price of oil goes up, so the price of gas goes up, you're taking 2.25%. It's basic arithmetic. 2.25% of a larger number is a larger number. So our taxes are going up, which is exacerbating the problem for people at the pump, right? Our gas tax goes up because there's a sales tax applied to it. Now, mind you, that's not unique to gas. That's happening to any product where the sales tax is applied, right? 8-9% sales tax, state and local, across California. As we see inflation go up, our sales tax revenues, our sales tax burden is going up. But that's also impacting gas. Now, the mystery surcharge also has, I think this is the bigger part of the component. We have a unique blend in California. And to some extent, there's logic to it. Anyone that's going to remember the smog in Los Angeles during the 1970s, the blend that we use in California is designed to address that. And obviously, the air in Los Angeles is exponentially better than where it was. And so, you can have arguments into pro and con, but there is a logic behind why we have our unique blend. But it adds a cost. Now, what happened, and what this Berkeley professor is referring to, is that there was an explosion at a refinery plant in 2015 that expanded kind of that cost that we've always been paying, but that expansion has not gone down. So we kind of, had this problem in the supply chain. The premium that we pay here in California increased and then never went down. And that was different than what's in the past. But in terms of the mystery, what's also happened is at that same time, 2015 is around the time we started having all of our global climate change policies that were implemented. And those will have a unique impact on prices here in California relative to the rest of the country. And so I imagine a lot of what he's trying to describe as a mystery is what we've been talking about for a long time at Pacific Research Institute, that when you have all of these cap and trade regulations, when you have all of these, taxes and fees and, renewable mandates, that's going to drive up the cost of energy across the board. It's going to do it in ways that sometimes are difficult to predict and difficult to trace. But this premium that we're seeing, this expansion, is just the logical implications of the global climate change policies that California has been pursuing. And I think it's important for us to recognize it so that when we're making policy, we understand these are the consequences of what we're trying to do.
So much of the focus in recent weeks has been on how to give Americans relief from record high gas prices. So in Washington, we've seen President Joe Biden call for the federal gasoline excise tax to be temporarily suspended this summer. But House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and liberals in Congress have been rather cool to the idea. So would drivers actually see some relief if this gas excise tax was suspended or lowered?
Not much. I mean, you have to remember the gas tax suspension. It's a demand side policy trying to address a supply side problem, right? Why are gas prices going up? If we just look at the unique factor, it's constraints on the supply side. So if we're looking at the economics of it, if we have these supply constraints and now we're trying to boost up demand, what you would expect to see is actually upward pressure on prices, especially because there's still no incentive to expand production. So, given those constraints, given that we imagine that supply can't respond to it, that you're not going to actually, if you reduce the gas tax, you're not going to necessarily see the effects that you would be hoping to see. So it's hard to see how this policy really is helpful.
The Democrats in Sacramento ended up rejecting the idea of suspending the gas excise tax, arguing that oil companies wouldn't pass along the full amount of the relief to consumers. So instead, they have just enacted what they're calling, quote, a middle-class tax rebate, sending out checks of up to $1,000, $1,050 to help Californians deal with rising inflation and gas prices. What's your view on the Democratic plan?
I would say there's a few things that are going on here, trying to disimpact them. I mean, to one extent, right? If California has a spending issue, and if we're taking some of this surplus money and as opposed to creating a permanent spending program, actually sending it out to Californians, I mean, to some extent that's great, right? Milton Friedman, never saw a tax that it didn't like. I think there is some validity to that when you're looking at how big the surplus is. And the long-term spending issues we have in California. So I think they're just getting the money out of Sacramento. I think to some extent, I have some sympathies with that. And undoubtedly, California has an excessively high gas tax. And so the ideal kind of response would be if we could bring our gas tax down to the national average and actually provide some permanent relief, long-term relief to consumers. And, while the short-term impact may not, consumers may not see it right away because of the current supply constraints, certainly long-term, there would be a great deal of value to that. And obviously, having said, sending money back, you're not going to really see this policy, just like with the federal gas tax, you're not going to be fundamentally addressing the problems affecting the gas market. So, and nor are you actually improving the anti-growth tax system here in California. So, if you're going to be looking at it from that perspective, it's an inefficient program. It's going to be a wasteful way to spend the money. There's much better things in terms of permanent tax relief, improving the pro-growth tax environment in California that we could and should be doing with that money rather than just sending out checks.
So some have argued that suspending gas taxes or sending out these rebate checks will actually make the twin problems of rising gas prices and inflation even worse, as you'd be overstimulating the economy again and driving up the demand for gas. So where do you come down on this debate?
It comes down to basic price theory. And, again, with constrained supplies, and if we're going to have a policy that's going to boost demand, well, rising demand in face of constrained supply puts upward pressure on prices. And so undoubtedly, we're going to see that. So absolutely, I think you could very much have the ironic impact of when you're sending out these rebate checks of putting higher pressure on gas prices. Now, when you're sending out a rebate check, obviously that's not directly linked to gasoline. So the rebate checks could actually spread the inflationary problem to other parts of the economy as well, because depending on how consumers spend that money, you're going to be seeing that impact elsewhere. Within all this, obviously, it depends on what the Federal Reserve does and how it responds to these policies in terms of whether it's going to monetize it as in that monetization actually being the actual cost of the inflation. So if the Fed doesn't monetize it, then what you're actually going to be doing is you're going to be seeing kind of resources get constrained in unknown ways, kind of pushing things around, not not stimulating the economy, but creating price distortions. And so, that's a bit of the unknown, kind of how the adverse consequences are going to be manifested. But what is sure is that you're not actually helping improve the underlying incentives of the economy. You're not helping to improve the kind of factors that are harming the oil and gas markets, that are harming kind of consumers who have high gas prices. So the one thing we can be certain about is that we're not actually addressing the problem that the policy is intended to address.
Well, Wayne, that said, looking ahead, how long do you think we'll be paying record prices for gas? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel? $6 or $7 gas prices the new normal, or will things return to more normal price levels sometime in the future?
Unfortunately, based on the current trends, $6 to $7 gas in California is going to be the new normal. I mean, the good news, right, is that part of the push to $6 to $7 have been the overall inflationary pressures. And if the Federal Reserve continues on its policy of raising rates, which is dampening the growth, or actually reducing the money supply that's out there. And if they stay on that path, and they've given every indication that they intend to, that's going to control inflationary pressures. So inflationary pressures will have peaked, which means the pressure to keep going up beyond $6 to $7 gas is going to be lessened, because monetary policy is now going in the right direction. But the bad news that we've been talking about this whole time is the constraints in the oil market, right? We still have capacity constraints. The policies to discourage production in the U.S. continues, right? We're going to continue to boycott Russian oil, which from a geopolitical perspective makes a ton of sense, but it keeps upward pressure on prices. So at least for the short term, current prices are going to remain around this level. If we want to bring oil prices back down, Tim mentioned earlier that we were once energy independent, and that that additional production is the best way to bring prices back down, right? If the U.S. begins to become kind of a growth player in the oil markets, I guess if you put it that way, that is the best way to bring oil prices back down to a level that's going to be much more affordable to the average consumer. And on a positive note, the oil market is very responsive to changes, and things can change quite quickly. So if we change direction, there could be a lot of positive movement on prices. And I guess that's the optimistic outlook looking into the future.
So inflation, as we've mentioned, is another major economic problem hurting millions of Americans this summer. So according to the latest revised figures, GDP fell by 1.6% at an annualized rate last quarter. So what's your outlook for the rest of the year and into next year? Is inflation here to stay? And what's your view of some of the measures that policymakers are considering to, quote unquote, combat inflation? And is there anything we can really do in the short term to stop rapidly rising prices?
There's a lot we can do. Some of the policies that we're talking about would not be helpful, but the idea that increasing government spending will actually control inflation, that's just not supported by economic theory nor by economic history. And so that could be very troubling. We're talking about what policymakers are considering. That is the absolute wrong thing to do. And if history is a guide, if we do that, we're going to continue to see upward pressures. As we just mentioned, the Fed's taking the right actions, right? Finally, the Fed is constraining the money supply. That's their most important kind of thing that they should be doing. And if they're allowed to continue on that path, we are likely have seen the peak, or coming close to the peak in inflation. Now, that's a little bit more relevant for economists and families, because even if we hit the peak, we're still going to experience uncomfortable inflationary pressures for many more months, likely through the end of 2022 and into 2023, right? From an economist's perspective, if inflation falls from 8.6% to 5%, we're everything is going well and we're in the right direction. But year over year, 5% price increases still hurts most families. So we're certainly not done with the damage and the hardships that many families are going to have to deal with. And to the extent that those spending kind of thoughts, or the spending kind of proposals come into fruition, that's going to make it harder for the Federal Reserve to stay on course. And so that is something to be concerned about. I mean, what the federal government can do is they can bring their budget under control. They could stop, if they stop spending money irresponsibly, that removes the fiscal pressure for the Fed to monetize the debt, which increases inflationary pressures. And the other thing we have to remember is, as the government continues to spend more than it raises and continue to have this spending problem, the rule of thumb is every 1% increase in interest rates adds about $100 to $200 billion in costs for the federal government. And those are just costs to pay interest. That's not providing any services to taxpayers and to citizens. That's just to pay interest on the services that were provided years ago. And so the more we have that spending problem, the more we add to that pressure. And it one, creates a budgetary problem, and two, it makes it more difficult for the Fed to continue to do what it should be doing, what it's finally doing, which is to bring back control of the money supply. So there is a lot that the federal government can do in terms of fiscal responsibility. Will they do that? Well, that's, I have a little less confident that they're going to do what's necessary to really help support the Fed. And so what we really need to see is the Federal Reserve have a very kind of stiffen its spine into a very difficult situation and continue to constrain the money supply despite the budgetary problems it's going to be creating for the government. And we'll have to wait and see how this experiment works out.
So finally, Wayne, let's circle back to these high gas prices. If you were advising policymakers in Washington or Sacramento, what would be the most important priority today to bring down gas prices? What, if anything, can be done to bring relief as quickly as possible?
Expand supply, remove the regulatory impediments that are driving up costs with very little benefit with respect to the environment. To recognize that fossil fuels are an important part of the energy mix for several, decades to come. The energy transition, notwithstanding, we still need fossil fuels. And the idea that we can phase out in a matter of, a couple of years is just not feasible. And we're actually seeing those consequences. And if we want to have affordable gas, we need to have increases in supply. And you're not going to invest billions of dollars into drilling new wells, into new refining capacities, when the government's telling you that we want you to be out of business within the next 5 years. So please spend billions of dollars now, but you won't have, years to earn back a return on your investment. You're just not going to get the investment. And what you're going to see is shortages and high prices. I think on a positive front, though, if we're willing to look honestly at what's happening, this is the consequence of those policies, right? If you are going to be going forward on the global climate change policies that California so kind of often talks about, the consequences of our unaffordable energy. This is what we'd have to live with going forward. And if we don't like that outcome, and I think we clearly don't like the outcome, the implications of this, we need to expand supply.
Thanks so much, Wayne.
Oh, absolutely.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.